I wasn't even fully awake when the screaming started. My head throbbed like a hammer striking metal, and my mouth felt like I'd swallowed sand. I blinked against the harsh hospital lights, but I couldn't tell if it was morning or night, or if the world had simply forgotten me. My body ached in unfamiliar ways. My left leg was trapped in a brace, my arm weighed down by a sling, and bruises bloomed across my ribs and shoulder like angry flowers. Wires ran from my body to monitors I barely understood. I could hear the faint beeping, rhythmic, almost comforting, until the sound twisted into anxiety. I remembered the accident in flashes. Metal folding over metal, the car spinning, the shrill wail of sirens, then nothing. The nothing had been broken by Tessa's voice. "So dramatic," she said, leaning against the wall with arms crossed. "Totally your car for what? A few cracked ribs and a sprain. That thing was junk anyway." Her words hit harder than any crash. My mother chuckled without looking up from her phone, scrolling as if nothing mattered. I stayed quiet, the silence I'd learned to wear like armor. "You always fake being sick," Tessa continued, smirking down at me. "You've been doing it since we were kids." It wasn't just cruel, it was a hammer to the chest. Gaslighting was familiar, and I felt it settle over me like a cold, wet blanket. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, to tell them I wasn't faking. But I had learned. Silence was safer. Then it happened. The monitor's beep grew louder in the tense quiet. Tessa's foot tapped impatiently. "Ugh, can that thing stop beeping already?" she complained. Before I could react, she yanked the cord free. The screen went dark. The room fell silent, except for the echo of my own shallow breaths. My heart pounded, but my body refused to move. Maybe this was how people lost their minds. Not all at once, not loudly, but slowly, when no one believed them. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I didn't. Exhaustion and fear locked my throat. I just watched as the room became impossibly still, the danger invisible to everyone but me. And then the door clicked, the nurse stepped in, calm, unreadable, sharp eyes sweeping the scene. "You're not leaving. I've called the police." Tessa froze, pale as if someone had dumped ice water over her head. My mother's mouth opened, then closed again, caught mid-denial. Excuses began tumbling out of Tessa's lips like water from a broken dam. She didn't mean anything by it, she was just upset. "It's been a stressful week." The nurse didn't respond. She moved to reconnect the monitor, her hands steady, precise. Seconds later, 2 officers arrived, 1 woman, 1 man, their presence filling the room with authority. They spoke to the nurse first, then turned their attention to me. "Do you feel safe?" one asked. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My silence carried more weight than any words. Tessa was detained for interfering with medical equipment and threatening a patient. My mother stumbled backward, flustered, denying, blaming, scrambling to salvage dignity that was gone. The officers escorted her out, leaving the room quiet, empty in a way that finally felt safe. The door clicked shut behind them. I exhaled, trembling under the blanket. The monitor beeped steadily, insistently, as if trying to convince me I was still alive, still safe. My hands shook, catching up to what my body had already endured, and then it hit me. If the nurse hadn't been standing outside, if she hadn't heard the cord rip free, there would have been no witness. Just me, flatlining in silence, while my sister stood there pretending it was nothing. I pressed my palms to my face, tasting the salt of tears I couldn't let fall. Relief swelled alongside a new, terrifying awareness. I had been closer to death than I'd ever known. But I had survived. Somehow I had survived, and this time someone had believed me. The next day, an older nurse arrived at my bedside, her presence calm in a way that only comes from seeing too much. She moved with quiet authority, adjusting my checking vitals and speaking in measured tones. "We can have a social worker check-in if you want," she offered. I didn't know what I wanted, only what I didn't. I didn't want another person dismissing my existence. Dr. Connor came in after her. He wasn't one of the rushed ER residents, flipping through charts like a deck of cards. He moved deliberately, pausing as if every step mattered. His eyes met mine before words left his mouth. "I've already read my entire life between the lines of your chart," he said softly. He asked about pain. I said, "I'm fine," mostly because fine was the easiest word, the one that didn't demand explanation, the one that shielded me from another lecture, another judgment. And then he showed me the documents. While I'd been unconscious, my sister had tried to access my medical chart, claiming emergency contact status. Denied once, she returned later with another nurse, her tactics shifting like a predator circling. She whispered that I had a long history of attention-seeking behavior, claimed I was exaggerating symptoms, and suggested my pain medication was unnecessary. My mother wasn't innocent either. The hospital cameras recorded multiple instances of her rolling her eyes behind nurses' backs, making faces, mocking my breathing. Small gestures, easily dismissed if described out loud, but dangerous when you're trapped in a bed, unable to defend yourself. The documentation was meticulous. Timestamps, witness statements, a complete paper trail. Dr. Connor asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint. I stared at the wall, letting the weight of the paper stacks sink in. Premeditation. Calculation. This wasn't an accident or a momentary lapse. It was a pattern. I realized, in that quiet room filled with papers and professional eyes, that the anger I expected to feel wasn't there. Anger would have meant I still believed this was new, still thought there might be a misunderstanding. What I felt instead was colder, clearer, detachment edged with bitter acknowledgement. I had spent years telling myself my sister was just sharp, my mother was just stressed, that they didn't mean it the way it sounded. That had been the lie I used to survive them. The hospital confirmed the truth. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was intentional, systematic, and undeniable. The professionals who documented, witnessed, and validated it gave me a weighty gift. Proof that my instincts, my fear, my disbelief were all real. Later, they moved me to a quieter floor. The room was smaller, tucked near the end of a long, empty hallway. The nurse explained it was standard for trauma patients, but I saw the truth in her eyes. This wasn't just about recovery. This was about protection. The beeping monitors, the locked doors, the careful observation. It was a buffer against the family who had proven dangerous. For the first time since the accident, I felt a flicker of clarity. The hospital didn't trust my family. And after everything I'd seen, I didn't trust them either. I lay in the small bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the cold, clinical light wash over me. Relief and horror coexisted. Relief that someone believed me, horror that the pattern had been so long, so deliberate. Every glance at the monitor reminded me of how close I had come to a life that wasn't mine anymore. Every nurse who walked in reminded me that safety could be real, that authority could be on my side. The realization settled like ice in my chest. Survival wasn't about hope anymore. It was about acknowledgement, vigilance, and proving that the pattern I had spent my life navigating was finally recognized for what it was. And in that recognition, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. A dangerous, potent clarity. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overreacting. I had been targeted, and now, for the first time, I had allies who could see it too. The next morning, a nurse returned my belongings in a clear plastic bag. My wallet, my watch, my phone. The battery was nearly dead, the screen dark until the moment I touched it. Then it lit up like a warning sign. 32 missed calls, 17 voicemails, 6 texts from Tessa, all sent between midnight and 3 in the morning. The first text tried to sound confused. "I can't believe you let them arrest us." The next dropped the mask. "Call me now before this gets worse." By the last one, there was nothing left but rage. "You're ruining everything." Each message was sharper than the last, more frantic, as if the more she typed, the more she could force reality to bend back into place. As if enough words could undo police lights, witnesses, paperwork. My mother's messages were different. Fewer words, cleaner sentences. "We didn't mean for it to go this far. Stop making this public. You're hurting the family." She used the word family like a shield. Like it could block consequences. Like it erased the fact that someone had unplugged a heart monitor while I lay unable to move. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering, feeling that familiar pressure to fix it, to smooth it over. to make myself smaller so everyone else could stay comfortable. The realization landed hard. They weren't scared of what happened to me. They were scared of being seen. The phone rang again. Aunt Laura. She was crying before I could say hello. She'd heard something, not all of it. My mother had already called her, voice shaking just enough to sound wounded. According to that version, I'd set them up. I'd made a scene. I was unstable, doped up on pain medication and confused. Aunt Laura's voice trembled. Is any of it true? So I told her. About the monitor, the nurse standing outside the door, the silence when the screen went dark, police, the documentation. I told her I hadn't even had the strength to argue, and that was the part that scared me the most, that they would do something like that when I couldn't fight back. There was a long pause. Then she whispered, "Oh my God." Not shocked, not dramatic. It sounded like someone finally seeing something they should have noticed years ago. After we hung up, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my cousin Rachel. "Check the family chat," she wrote. Screenshots followed. Long threads. Familiar names. People choosing sides in real time. "You're doing too much. This should have been handled privately. Tessa was just emotional. Your mother was just worried." Then the messages shifted. People admitting things they'd never said out loud before. That they'd seen Tessa behave like this for years. That my mother twisted stories, played the victim, controlled the narrative. That they'd noticed and said nothing because it was easier than dealing with her. One message stopped me cold. "We all kind of knew. We just didn't think it would get this bad." That part hurt more than the accident. More than the bruises, the pain, the hospital bed. Because it meant I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. They knew. They all knew. And they let it keep happening because it was convenient. I set the phone down and stared at the wall, the monitor beeping steadily beside me. The family chaos kept unfolding without my participation. Arguments, defenses, excuses. But for the first time I wasn't inside it. I was watching from a distance, protected by locked doors and staff who believed me. The pattern was no longer just mine to carry. It was exposed, documented, undeniable. And as the noise continued to swell outside my room, one thought settled quietly, firmly in my chest. This wasn't just fallout. This was the beginning of something breaking open, and I wasn't going to close it again. 2 days later, discharge day arrived like an ambush. My body still ached in ways I hadn't realized were possible. Stiff, sore, sleep fractured into shallow, restless bursts. The hospital staff moved around me with careful awareness, glances flicking toward the hallway entrances, hands hovering near wheelchair brakes, like they knew I might face another confrontation. I hadn't told anyone when I'd be leaving, hoping secrecy would buy me a clean exit. It didn't. They were waiting. Tessa leaned on the railing outside the exit, scrolling her phone with that bored, calculated air of someone who thinks the world exists to entertain her. My mother stood next to her, clutching a grocery bag. Flowers. A cheap balloon with "Get well soon" in garish letters. Her smile was wide, practiced. Like nothing had happened. Like all of this could be fixed with a soft tone and props. "We didn't mean for it to get so far," my mother said, voice sweet, careful. I didn't respond. I didn't take the flowers. My hands gripped the wheelchair arms as the nurse guided me forward, her fingers tightening slightly. Not in worry, but in quiet recognition. My mother jogged alongside, half keeping up, half performing. Tessa smirked, clearly rehearsing how she would make herself look innocent, how she would flip the story if anyone asked. The narrative was obvious. I was overreacting, making a private issue public, punishing them for one misunderstanding. Every word, every gesture carefully curated. The nurse's face stayed neutral, but her eyes weren't. She had seen this dynamic before. She didn't look shocked, she looked tired. And in that tiredness, I found a small, strange comfort. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't alone. Back home, the warning signs continued. A suitcase sat in the hallway as if placed deliberately, waiting for me to notice. I went room to room, checking locks, pulling curtains, flicking lights on and off. Every passing car made my stomach tighten. Every silence in the apartment felt like it was holding its breath. This wasn't paranoia. It was experience. Then came the voicemail from my landlord. Someone had called asking for updates on the lease agreement and pushed for a copy of the key. When asked for identification, the woman hung up. Claimed she was my sister. It wasn't just nerves anymore. It was escalation, boundary violation, stalking behavior. And then the financial betrayal hit. I called the banks, starting with a small credit union I'd mostly forgotten about. I'd opened the account years ago during my mother's hip surgery, a shared account for medical expenses. Back then it had felt practical, even loving. Now it felt like a trap I'd laid for myself and forgotten. The balance had been over $10,000 just 3 months ago. Now it was $800 and change. I refreshed the screen, willing the numbers to correct themselves. They didn't point to large withdrawals, spaced far enough apart to avoid fraud alerts. $3,000 here, $3,000 there. Clean, legal, intentional. I didn't call my mother to ask. Didn't need to. I closed the account immediately and began pulling my name off everything. Credit cards, shared utilities, old authorizations I'd forgotten over the years. Each click felt like ripping out a wire that had been quietly draining me. Next came security measures. Cameras on the front porch, side door, living room facing the entryway. Hated the idea. Hated that I even had to think this way. But I hated the alternative more. I didn't want to be the woman on the news people said should have seen it coming. The technician asked if I'd had break-ins before. Make sure everything uploads to the cloud, I told him. That was all the answer he needed. Finally, for the first time in over 4 days, I slept. Heavy sleep that made me forget where I was, until the beeping of the monitors or the soft glow of a phone screen pulled me back. This was the moment I understood something fundamental. Survival wasn't about hoping for care or understanding. It was about action, protection, and reclaiming control. The financial abuse, the boundary violations, the stalking behavior. It was all part of a pattern. But now I had eyes on it, hands in it, a plan forming with each click, each call, each security measure. I was no longer just a victim. I was learning to be the woman who could survive and fight back, before anyone else had the chance to cross the line again. The first bang came just after midnight. Not a knock, a dull, solid thud like a shoulder hitting the door. Then another. Then my name. I dropped behind the couch, phone already in my hand, dialing before my brain fully caught up outside. Tessa's voice cut through the night. Loud, sharp, demanding I open the door. My mother stood closer behind her, voice lower, controlled. "Let's not make this worse," she said. "We can talk like adults. You owe us that much." I didn't answer. The 911 operator's voice was steady in my ear. "Stay where you are. Don't engage. Wait." Dead on the live feed, I watched Tessa pace the porch, restless, furious. Then she bent down and picked up a brick from the garden bed. She didn't throw it right away. She just weighed it in her hand, turning it once, like she was deciding how far she was willing to go. My chest tightened until I couldn't breathe. The police arrived faster than I expected. No sirens, just headlights washing the yard in white. An officer stepped between them and my door, firm, unmoving. Tessa laughed nervously, my mother smoothing her tone. "We were just checking on her," she said. The officer didn't budge. They backed away. But they didn't leave. They sat in a car across the street for nearly an hour, watching my house like they were waiting for something to change. I called Uncle Alan and Aunt Lorna after the police left. I didn't soften it. I didn't edit. I told them about the hospital, the bank account, the landlord call, the brick in Tessa's hand. There was no pause, no disbelief. They said they were on their way. They arrived with overnight bags like this wasn't a question. It was a decision. Aunt Lorna made tea. Uncle Alan checked every lock without a word. "I'll stay up for a while," he said. In the morning, the kitchen was wrecked. A cabinet door hung crooked from one hinge. Every dish lay shattered across the floor. The window above the sink was forced open, just enough to slip in a hand or a tool. This wasn't an accident. Aunt Lorna swept in silence. Uncle Alan studied the frame, jaw set in a way I'd never seen before. Then my phone chimed. "Email." Confirmation of beneficiary change.it was from my life insurance provider, an account I hadn't touched in years. A request had been submitted to remove me as the primary beneficiary and replace me with my mother. It hadn't gone through. The digital signature didn't match. But the attempt alone made me feel sick. A memory surfaced uninvited. A dinner 2 years ago. My mother talking about being prepared. Tessa joking that if I died, she hoped she'd get my car. They remembered it too. Uncle Alan called a lawyer he trusted and handed me the phone. Questions came fast. Police reports. Financial access. Medical proxies. Hospital documentation. The lawyer's voice was calm but sharp. "This isn't just emotional abuse," he said. "This is a pattern that's edging into something criminal." By afternoon, accounts were closed or moved. Locks changed again. Extra bolts installed. Aunt Lorna texted relatives quietly, telling them not to share information about me. That night, a security alert flashed across my phone. Motion detected. Front porch. A man I didn't recognize stood there. Hoodie. Phone pressed to his ear. He paced slowly, then looked directly at the door. He said my name. Not loud, not threatening, like he expected me to answer. He stayed for 2 minutes, then walked to a car I didn't recognize and drove away. I didn't sleep. I watched the footage on loop until Aunt Lorna found me still awake. She didn't ask who he was. "We should have stopped them years ago," she said. Uncle Alan forwarded the footage to the police and the lawyer, then called a family meeting. The next evening, relevant relatives gathered in Aunt Lorna's living room. I sat wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of hospital disinfectant. Uncle Alan laid everything out. The unplugged monitor. The attempts to access my medical records. The drained joint account. The life insurance change request. The man at my door who knew my name. Then my cousin Abby spoke up. "Your mother called me days ago," she said quietly. "She asked how much you might inherit from Grandpa." There was no inheritance, just assumptions. Hearing it said out loud twisted my stomach. Someone asked the question none of us wanted to voice. "Was the man sent to scare you?" I shook my head slowly. "I don't know," I said. He looked too calm. The room went silent. For the first time, the pattern wasn't just visible. It was undeniable. And it wasn't mine to face alone anymore. Uncle Alan moved first. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He picked up the phone and made a few calls. Swift, deliberate, decisive. By that evening, the process had begun. Mother and Tessa removed from the family business account. The LLC they had no real role in, yet had quietly collected dividends from for years, was locked down. The small trust grandfather had set up, so-called family emergencies, was frozen. They had dipped into it often, using guilt and stories about needing help to justify their withdrawals. He looked at me as he hung up. "Stop worrying, it's being handled," he said. His face, though calm, carried strain. He knew this wouldn't end cleanly. He was right. At 8:45 p.m. they arrived. No warning, no apology. My mother clutched a folder like it proved something. Tessa pushed past the threshold before anyone could stop her. They weren't there to talk. They were there to reclaim control. Accusations flew. Mother claimed I was poisoning the family, exaggerating everything, playing the victim. Tessa knocked over a lamp, shouting that I was turning everyone against them. My aunt's voice cut through. "Leave." Mother snapped back, accusing my aunt of just wanting to take my money too. The room throbbed with tension, but then Uncle Alan stepped forward. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. Just one sentence, calm and clear, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If you say one more word, I will have you cut out of every remaining contract, every asset, every dollar tied to this family." Mother froze. Tessa opened her mouth and stopped. Uncle raised a finger. "No more. We're done protecting you from yourselves." Then he turned to me. "Do you want them here?" "No," I said. And for the first time in my life, I thought, someone listened. They were told to leave or face police intervention again. My aunt stood between me and the door until they backed out. No screaming. No tears. Just two people realizing the one thing they valued most. Access was gone. That night I slept on the couch. Aunt Lorna made tea. Uncle Alan changed the locks again, even though they never had keys. I stared out the window, not expecting them to return, but finally believing they might not. The next morning, fear hadn't vanished. Safety felt temporary, like a thin sheet stretched over something fragile. I slept lightly. Every sound made my eyes open. Every phone vibration sent a jolt through me. I opened my laptop. Quietly, I started looking at apartments in other cities. Not nearby. Not places my mother might pass through. Small quiet towns. Places where no one knew my last name or had expectations of me. Just scrolling felt like breathing. By the end of the week, restraining order paperwork was filed. Hospital documentation attached. Police reports cross-referenced. The lawyer walked me through everything in calm, careful language. Not family drama. Documented pattern. Interference, intimidation, attempted control. Seeing it written out made something ache. Not because I wanted them punished, but because I finally understood how serious it had always been. Then came the question my uncle asked, framing it not as a test or suggestion, but as a real choice. Do you want to stay here? Or do you want to leave? I want to leave, I said. No big announcements. No social media posts. Early morning before the sun fully rose. One suitcase with irreplaceable things. Everything else, donated, sold, left behind. Uncle drove ahead with a rented trailer. Second-hand furniture bought quickly. Aunt followed in her car, blankets, snacks, thermos of coffee. It looked like a normal road trip. It wasn't. It felt closer to an evacuation point 2 hours away. The new apartment waited. Small, older, quiet neighbors, working locks. A layout that didn't echo with memories. That was enough. The first night I sat on the floor back against the wall. No yelling. No footsteps outside. No voices saying my name like they owned it. Silence. Too clean. Too unfamiliar. Phone face down. Waiting for something bad. Nothing came. Days turned into weeks. Short walks around the block, then longer ones. I bought a small table and 2 chairs from a thrift store. Uncle hung blackout curtains. Aunt filled the pantry, labeling containers, pretending not to notice when I got quiet. They visited often, but never pushed. Never asked how I was healing. Never told me what I should feel. They just showed up. That alone felt like something I'd never had before. The restraining order held. No strange cars. No unknown numbers at midnight. Nothing directly from my mother or sister. That didn't mean they disappeared. Just meant they stopped reaching me, Cousin Abby once, through an unknown number. You were right. I didn't want to see it before. I do now. I didn't reply. Not angry. Done explaining myself. Work became my anchor. Remote, quiet, steady. Nothing dramatic. Saving money. Cooking. Learning which grocery store had the best bread. Grief didn't vanish. Came in waves. Grief for a mother who had protected them. A sister who hadn't competed. A family that didn't treat love like leverage. But it passed. Always passed. One evening, Aunt asked from the balcony, "Are you happy?" I didn't answer right away. Happiness felt too big a word. Then I said, "I feel like myself for the first time in a long time. Not the version who stayed quiet to survive. Not the one who absorbed blame to keep peace. Just me. And that is enough." I stopped wondering about the stories they told. Stopped caring. What mattered was that they didn't know where I lived, who I worked for, or who I was becoming. The silence that once terrified me now felt like space. Real space. The kind you could grow into. I am Ginger J. Bradley, and for the first time in my life I am